On this episode of CSS Breakdown, Book by Book, Season 07, Episode 14, from Introduction to Psychology 15th edition by Atkinson and Hilgard, we're confronting a universal experience, the profound impact of stress on our minds and bodies. How do some people not only survive, but thrive amidst immense pressure? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Here, we take a stack of information, in this case, a deep dive into Introduction to Psychology by Atkinson and Hilgard, and pull out the most important insights. We want to help you understand not just how stress affects us, but why some individuals seem to flourish under pressure. Okay, let's unpack this.
Our mission today is really to distill the core wisdom from this rich source material. We want to give you a comprehensive, nuanced understanding of stress, health, and coping, and especially focusing on those who manage to not only navigate, but actually grow through immense pressure.
Right, moving beyond just saying stress is bad to really getting into the weeds.
Exactly, understanding the mechanisms and also our incredible capacity for resilience.
Okay, so let's start with a scenario. I think a lot of us can relate to this. Imagine Janet's morning. She spills juice on her only clean blouse. Minor annoyance, right?
Happens to the best of us.
Then she gets to work, 32 emails, 15 phone messages waiting. Ugh. Her boss needs a financial report, like, now for tomorrow morning. And then, computer crash.
Oh no, the classic trifecta.
Exactly. So she calls her mom for support, but instead hears her father's been hospitalized with chest pains.
Wow, that escalated quickly.
Right. After hanging up, Janet feels disoriented. Her heart's racing. It's a migraine. I mean, Janet's day just perfectly shows how stress works, doesn't it? From the little daily hassles to the really big, life-altering stuff.
It really does paint a vivid picture, which brings us to the core question. What is stress, fundamentally? Our source defines stress as experiencing events that are perceived as endangering one's physical or psychological well-being.
Perceived. That feels important.
It's crucial. These events are the stressors, the juice spill, the emails, the sick father. And Janet's racing heart, the migraine, those are her stress responses. But here's the thing. People's responses differ massively. Put someone else in Janet's shoes, they might crumble, develop serious issues. Someone else, they might cope, maybe even find it challenging, invigorating even.
And that's the fascinating part, isn't it? Why the difference? Our source points to 4 key characteristics of events that tend to be perceived as stressful. And again, it hammers home that perception is often just as important as the event itself. First up, traumatic events. These are the big ones, situations of extreme danger, way outside normal human experience. Think natural disasters, wars, physical assault.
Yeah, and there's often a pattern to the psychological reaction. First, people are often stunned, dazed, then maybe passive, finding it hard to do anything. And finally, they can become anxious, apprehensive, maybe reliving the trauma over and over.
And the impact can be incredibly long-lasting.
Absolutely. I mean, what's often overlooked is just how persistent trauma's grip can be. Studies after disasters like the Buffalo Creek flood back in '72 or the 2004 tsunami, they found significant percentages of survivors, sometimes over 60% initially, still had PTSD symptoms years later. We saw similar things with Afghanis, Bosnian refugees. The long-term impact is profound.
And here's something really tough to grapple with. The source suggests that traumas caused by humans, rape, war, terrorism, might actually be more likely to cause PTSD than natural disasters.
Why is that, do they think?
Well, partly because they can shatter our fundamental beliefs about life, about other people, and often they target individuals, not whole communities, making the suffering feel incredibly isolating.
That makes sense.
The statistic for rape survivors is just staggering. 95% show PTSD symptoms in the first 2 weeks, 50% at 3 months, and even 4 or 5 years later, 25% are still suffering.
This raises a really important question then. What makes some experiences hit so differently? And how do things like culture and gender factor into who's more vulnerable? There was a study comparing survivors of Hurricane Andrew in Florida and Hurricane Paulina in Mexico. PTSD rates were high in both places, but the gap in symptoms between Mexican women and men was much larger than between American women and men.
Interesting. Why?
Researchers think it might reflect stronger traditional sex roles in Mexican culture at the time. If women are socialized to be more passive, it could lead to greater feelings of helplessness after a trauma. But interestingly, political activists who endure torture, they seem less prone to PTSD. Their preparation, their belief systems, it lets them frame the torture differently, maybe as an expected part of the struggle. It offers a kind of psychological buffer.
That idea of a psychological buffer, that's really key. And it leads right into the second characteristic, controllability. The degree to which we feel we can stop something bad or make something good happen, it hugely impacts how stressful we find it.
Right. having some agency.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just actual control. The belief that you have control can be just as powerful.
Okay, tell me more.
Think about this experiment. People look at disturbing photos of violent deaths. One group has a button they can press to stop seeing the image. The other group doesn't. Both groups see the photos for the same amount of time, but the group with the button, even if they never press it, shows way less anxiety.
Wow, just knowing the option is there.
Yeah. Same with a study using loud, unpleasant noise. People told they could turn it off, even if they didn't, performed much better on puzzles afterwards than those who felt they had no control. The perceived control made the difference.
You've nailed such a crucial point there. Perceived control really is a potent psychological buffer. And building on that, the third characteristic is predictability. Knowing if and when something stressful might happen can seriously lessen its impact, even if it's something unpleasant.
Like knowing when the dentist is going to drill.
Sort of, yeah. Rat studies show they'd rather get a shock they know is coming, because of a signal, than a surprise shock. Humans, too. Less emotional arousal if you know a mild shock is imminent.
Why is that?
A couple of reasons, possibly. The warning lets you brace yourself, maybe start some internal coping process, or it creates a safe period. You can relax until the signal comes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about unpredictable jobs like firefighting or ER medicine. That lack of knowing when the crisis hits is a huge stressor. Or the uncertainty cancer patients face. Or even torture victims. Those who could predict the timing often recovered better than those who felt it was completely random. Predictability matters, even for bad things.
Okay, fourth category. Major changes in life circumstances. This is where the Holmes and Rahi life event scale comes in. They argued that any big life change needing adjustment is stressful.
Right, like getting married is 50 points, death of a spouse is 100.
Yeah, but the scale has its critics. Most research now suggests that negative events generally hit harder than positive ones, health-wise.
That makes intuitive sense.
Plus, it kind of assumes everyone reacts the same way, which we know isn't true. Some people thrive on change. They find it challenging, exciting, not just stressful.
Definitely. And finally, let's not forget stress that comes from within. Internal conflicts. These are those unresolved issues, conscious or unconscious, where you're pulled in different directions. Incompatible goals or opposing motives.
Like wanting to ace your exams, but also wanting to party every night?
That's a simple example.
Yeah.
But it could be deeper stuff, too.
Yeah.
Like the conflict between wanting independence versus needing dependence, intimacy versus isolation, cooperation versus competition, or even basic impulses versus your moral standards.
Those inner tug-of-wars.
Exactly. Trying to navigate those opposing forces can create a lot of internal stress.
Okay, so we've mapped out what stress is, where it comes from, these different types of stressors. Now let's look inward. How does this actually play out in our minds, our emotions? What are the psychological reactions?
Well, the most common emotional response is probably anxiety. We touched on PTSD earlier, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's a really severe anxiety condition after trauma. You see detachment, reliving the event, sleep problems, being hyper-alert, sometimes survivor guilt.
And the long-term effects we mentioned are stark. Buffalo Creek survivors, Vietnam vets, years, even decades later, still struggling.
It's incredibly persistent. Another common reaction, especially to frustration, is anger, which can spill over into aggression.
The frustration-aggression hypothesis, right?
Exactly. When you're blocked from reaching a goal, it can trigger aggression. Not always, but often. And if you can't lash out at the source.
You kick the cat or yell at your roommate.
Pretty much. That's displaced aggression. The boss yells at you, you go home and take it out on your family. It's unfortunately common.
Then there's the other end of the spectrum, apathy, depression.
Right. If stress just keeps going and coping feels impossible, you might see learned helplessness kick in. This came out of Seligman's famous dog experiments. Dogs that couldn't escape electric shocks just gave up. Later, even when they could escape, they wouldn't even try. They'd learn to be helpless.
And you see that in humans.
You can. In extreme situations like concentration camps, or sometimes in victims of domestic abuse who feel trapped. They develop apathy, withdrawal. Though, it's important to say, the theory's been updated. Some people are actually invigorated by challenges, not crushed.
That difference again. Fascinating. What about thinking? Does stress mess with our cognition?
Oh, absolutely. Cognitive impairment is a big one. People under stress find it hard to concentrate, think logically, they get easily distracted, especially with complex tasks.
Why does that happen?
Could be the high emotional arousal just interfering with how we process information. Or it could be distracting thoughts, worrying, self-criticism. Think about test anxiety. You know the material, but you're so busy worrying or telling yourself you'll fail that you can't access it.
Or you misread the question.
Exactly. It can even make people rigidly stick to old habits, even when they're not working, like people in a fire pushing on a door that opens inward, panicking instead of trying something else.
Wow. So stress affects our emotions, our actions, our very thoughts. What about the body's reaction? The physiological side.
Okay, yeah, let's dive into the body's automatic response. When you perceive a threat, your body instantly prepares for emergency action, the classic fight-or-flight response. It's this incredibly complex, immediate mobilization. Your liver pumps out sugar for energy, hormones turn fats and proteins into more sugar, your metabolism speeds up.
Heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, all increase.
Right. Muscles tense up, digestion slows right down, no time for that. Your body even releases natural painkillers, endorphins. Blood vessels constrict in some areas, more red blood cells carry oxygen, more white blood cells get ready to fight infection.
It's like the body goes into overdrive.
Totally. And this whole cascade is orchestrated by two main systems, controlled by the hypothalamus in your brain, kind of the command center. There's the sympathetic nervous system, which gives you that instant jolt via hormones like epinephrine, adrenaline, and norepinephrine. And then there's the adrenal cortical system, which kicks in a bit slower, releasing cortisol, the main stress hormone.
Cortisol, that gets talked about a lot.
It does. It keeps fuel available and has other effects. Now, Hans Selye, a pioneer in stress research, described these physiological changes as part of what he called the general adaptation syndrome, or GAS.
GAS, okay.
He saw it in three phases. First, alarm. The initial mobilization, fight or flight, kicks in. Second, resistance. The body tries to cope with the ongoing stressor. But third, if the stress continues, exhaustion sets in.
Like the body just runs out of resources.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Physiological reserves get depleted. Selye argued that this chronic exhaustion, this prolonged stress, can lead to what he called diseases of adaptation, basically making the body more vulnerable to illness.
And linking back to PTSD, that's not just in the mind either, right? There are physical changes.
Definitely. People with PTSD show heightened physiological reactivity. Their bodies react more strongly to reminders of the trauma. There are also changes in those fight-or-flight neurotransmitters and hormones. Brain scans show differences too, like increased blood flow in brain areas involved in emotion, like the amygdala, when veterans with PTSD imagine combat scenes, compared to those without PTSD.
So the trauma actually reshapes the brain's response.
It seems so. Some studies even suggest potential damage to the hippocampus, which is involved in memory. That could explain some memory issues seen in PTSD. It really underlines that PTSD is a physical condition too.
You mentioned cortisol earlier. How does that play into PTSD?
This is intriguing. You might expect higher cortisol in chronic stress, but often people with PTSD actually show lower resting cortisol levels than people without it.
Lower. That seems counterintuitive.
It does. But one theory is that cortisol normally helps shut down that sympathetic nervous system activity after stress. So if your resting cortisol is lower, maybe that alarm system stays switched on for longer, making you more susceptible to conditioned fear, making it easier for PTSD to develop.
Huh. So lower cortisol might actually be a risk factor.
Possibly. Studies on accident survivors and rape survivors found that those who later developed PTSD had significantly lower cortisol levels right after the trauma compared to those who didn't develop it.
Okay, so if our bodies are constantly in this ready state or recovering slowly, what are the long-term consequences, this wear and tear?
That wear and tear has a name, allostatic load. It's the cumulative burden on the body from chronic overactivity of these stress response systems. And this can lead to real physical disorders. We're talking ulcers, high blood pressure, heart disease. It can also impair the immune system.
So what does this all mean for our long-term health?
It means chronic stress can be seriously damaging. Doctors estimate that emotional stress plays a key role in maybe over half of all medical problems. And these aren't just in your head. They're called psychophysiological disorders because emotions are central, but there's actual tissue damage. A stress-induced ulcer looks just like any other ulcer.
Wow. What about heart disease? That's a huge killer.
Coronary heart disease, or CHD, yes. Chronic stress is a major contributor. It can lead to plaque buildup in the arteries supplying the heart. Genetics play a role, of course, but lifestyle factors are massive: blood pressure, cholesterol, smoking, obesity, and stress links into many of these.
How strong is the link?
The InterHeart study, a huge international project, found that about a third of heart disease risk could be linked to psychosocial factors, including stress. We also see it in specific situations. People in high-strain jobs, lots of demands, little control, like assembly line work, have about 1.5 times the risk of CHD.
High demand, low control. That sounds stressful.
It is. And even things like a demanding family life on top of a stressful job can impact women's cardiovascular health. Employed mothers, especially with more children, showed higher risk in some studies.
Are there animal models for this?
Yes, fascinating studies with macaque monkeys. Disrupting their social environment, like making them constantly reestablish dominance hierarchies, actually induced physical changes in their arteries that look a lot like early coronary artery disease in humans.
Incredible. So the social stress directly caused physical damage.
Okay, let's unpack this fascinating connection between stress and the immune system. Psychoneuroimmunology, you called it.
That's the field, yes. Psychoneuroimmunology. It studies how psychological factors, thoughts, emotions, stress affect the nervous system, the endocrine hormone system, and crucially, the immune system. Your immune system uses specialized cells, lymphocytes, to protect you. But stress can impair its ability to function properly.
Making us more likely to get sick.
Exactly. More susceptible to infections, allergies, maybe even cancers and autoimmune disorders where the immune system attacks the body itself. Is there solid evidence for this, like catching a cold when stressed?
There is. A really groundbreaking study by Cohen and colleagues back in 1991 did just that. They measured people's stress levels, then deliberately exposed them to a common cold virus. And guess what? The volunteers who reported higher stress levels were significantly more likely to actually get infected and develop cold symptoms.
Wow, so it's not just an old wives' tale.
Not at all. And it holds for bigger stressors, too. Survivors of Hurricane Andrew, the Northridge earthquake, those whose lives were more severely disrupted showed poorer immune functioning afterwards. Even something like exam stress. One study found that small wounds on dental students healed about 40% more slowly right before major exams compared to during summer vacation, and this was linked to lower levels of key immune chemicals.
So stress tangibly weakens our defenses.
It really seems to. And remember controllability. That pops up here too. Animal studies again. Rats that could control electric shocks, even if they got the same number of shocks, had better immune cell function, better T-cell activity, and were better at rejecting tumors than rats getting identical shocks they couldn't control.
Control matters for immune function, too.
It appears so. And you see hints in humans. One study found the partner who initiated a marital separation, arguably having more control, showed better immune functioning than the partner who was left. Similarly, breast cancer patients with a pessimistic outlook, feeling less control, were more likely to have their cancer return or develop new tumors.
That's sobering. But you mentioned earlier, can psychological interventions actually help, even with something like cancer?
This is where some really surprising and, frankly, quite hopeful findings emerge. Supportive psychological interventions can sometimes influence the course of illness. David Spiegel's study with women who had metastatic breast cancer is maybe the most famous example. The women assigned to weekly support groups didn't just report better mood, they lived significantly longer on average, almost twice as long, 40 months versus 19 months for the control group.
That's incredible. Why would a support group do that?
The groups fostered psychological strength, reduced isolation, maybe helped them find new meaning, cope better. The exact mechanisms are still being explored, but the effect was powerful. We also see it with surgery. Patients given psychological prep information, relaxation techniques, ways to manage pain tend to recover faster, need less pain medication, and leave the hospital sooner.
Mind over matter to some extent.
Or maybe mind and body working together. Scientists are discovering that immune cells actually have receptors for neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers of the nervous system. This means the nervous system can potentially talk directly to immune cells, influencing their activity. So negative emotions affecting neurotransmitter levels could plausibly have a direct biochemical impact on immunity. It's an amazing web of connections.
Beyond these direct physiological links, stress also hits our health indirectly, right? Through our behaviors.
Absolutely. When we're stressed, healthy habits often go out the window. Students cramming might pull all-nighters, live on junk food, skip exercise.
Been there.
Right. Someone grieving might smoke more or drink more. People often drop their exercise routines when life gets hectic. Conversely, people who manage to maintain healthy lifestyles often say stressful events feel more manageable, they feel more in control.
And unhealthy behaviors can make stress worse.
Definitely. Drinking too much can impair your thinking, make you feel sluggish, making it harder to cope actively. It becomes a vicious cycle. There was even a finding that HIV patients under stress were more likely to engage in risky behaviors like unprotected sex or IV drug use, potentially worsening their health further.
Okay, so stress is pervasive. Its effects are deep, both psychologically and physically. But let's get back to that intriguing question. Here's where it gets really interesting. Why do some of us not just survive, but seem to thrive when faced with immense pressure? What makes the difference?
Great question. Theories abound, of course. Psychoanalytic theory, from Freud, might suggest some events trigger deeper unconscious conflicts. Maybe a disagreement with a boss feels extra stressful because it taps into unresolved issues with a parent.
So the past echoes in the present stress.
In that view, yes. Behaviorists would focus more on learned associations. Maybe a scary experience in the past, like almost skidding off a mountain road, conditions anxiety in similar situations later. And if you avoid high places after that, you never unlearn the fear.
Makes sense. But what about cognitive theories? Our thoughts, our mindset?
This is where things get really powerful for understanding thriving, especially the concepts of optimism and pessimism. The evidence for optimism's benefits is pretty compelling. There was a long-term Harvard study, 35 years, that found men who were pessimistic at age 25 were more likely to get physically ill later in life compared to the optimists.
35 years.
Well, other studies show optimists recover faster from bypass surgery, have about half the risk of heart attacks or other cardiac events over 10 years, adjust better to cancer diagnoses.
So our mindset really is a powerful physiological lever. How does pessimism actually hurt health?
Several ways, it seems. Pessimists tend to appraise events as more stressful in the first place. This leads to more chronic physiological arousal, that fight-or-flight system staying revved up. That, in turn, can lower immune function. Studies show pessimists tend to have higher blood pressure, poor immune responses. Among HIV patients, pessimism was linked to having a higher viral load.
Okay, so optimism seems protective. What else contributes to resilience?
Another key concept is hardiness. This isn't just about being tough. It's a specific cluster of attitudes identified by researcher Suzanne Cabasa. Hardiness has 3 C's: commitment, staying involved, feeling connected to people and events, not withdrawing; control, believing you can influence outcomes even when things are tough; and challenge, seeing difficulties not just as threats, but as opportunities to learn and grow.
Commitment, control, challenge. The 3 C's.
Exactly. Cabasa studied executives under high stress. The ones who stayed healthy, despite the pressure, scored high on these 3 C's. They were more involved, felt more in control, and viewed stress as a challenge. And this wasn't just a snapshot. Follow-up studies confirmed that hardiness predicted better health over time.
That challenge aspect links to something else, this idea of finding meaning even in trauma.
Yes, it's this surprising but actually quite heartwarming phenomenon. Many people who face major adversity, bereavement, cancer, heart attacks, HIV, report that their lives changed in profoundly positive ways afterwards.
Growth from suffering. Okay, let's unpack this.
It sounds paradoxical, but it's well documented. They talk about changed priorities, greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, increased spiritual sense. One woman quoted in the text, Alicia, said after loss, she now sees everything as a gift, finding meaning in suffering that enriched her life. And this isn't just feeling better, it links to health. Studies show bereaved people who found meaning were less depressed and anxious. Heart attack survivors who found meaning had better outcomes. HIV-positive men who found meaning in loss maintained healthier immune systems.
And does hardiness or optimism predict who finds meaning?
It seems so. Those traits appear to make it more likely that someone can reframe adversity and find that positive growth. It suggests these mindsets foster post-traumatic growth.
That's a powerful idea. But let's flip the coin. What about personality types that seem more vulnerable to stress, like the classic type A?
Ah, yes. Type A behavior, identified by cardiologists Friedman and Rosenman. These are the folks who are super competitive, always rushing, impatient, often hostile or easily angered, maybe masking self-doubt underneath, constantly pushing themselves.
We all know someone like that. Maybe, or someone like that.
Right. They famously identified type A using a structured interview, designed to be a bit irritating, to see how people reacted. In their big study of over 3,000 healthy middle-aged men, those identified as type A had twice as many heart attacks over the next decade as the more relaxed type B men, even after accounting for smoking, cholesterol, etc.
Twice as many. Was it the whole package or specific parts?
Later research really zeroed in on hostility and proneness to anger as the most toxic components of the type A pattern for heart health.
And is there a physiological reason for that?
Yes, the thinking is that hostile or type A individuals have a hyperresponsive sympathetic nervous system. When stressed, Their blood pressure, heart rate, and stress hormone levels shoot up much higher and maybe stay elevated longer.
Mm,
Over time, this repeated pounding takes a toll on the heart and blood vessels.
that chronic wear and tear again.
Exactly. Plus, hostility can have indirect effects. It often leads to more interpersonal conflict, less social support, which we know are also bad for health. The good news, though, is that type A behaviors, especially hostility, can often be modified with therapy.
Okay, so we understand the sources, the impacts, the individual differences. Let's shift to what we can actually do. Actionable strategies. How do we cope effectively?
Good question. Coping strategies generally fall into two broad categories: problem-focused and emotion-focused. Problem-focused coping is about tackling the stressor head-on, defining the problem, brainstorming solutions, weighing the pros and cons, choosing a path, and acting.
Like making a plan to deal with the 32 emails.
Exactly. Or it could be inward-focused, like changing unrealistic goals or learning new skills to handle the situation better. People who use more problem-focused coping tend to report less depression and seem to have better health outcomes, even recovering better from heart surgery.
And the other type, emotion-focused.
That's about managing the negative emotions caused by stress, especially when you can't easily change the situation itself. This can involve behavioral strategies like exercising, maybe using alcohol or drugs, though that's often maladaptive, venting to friends, seeking social support, or it can involve cognitive strategies reappraising the situation, trying to see it in a less threatening light, changing its meaning for you.
You mentioned social support there. How important is that?
Immensely important. Seeking emotional comfort, advice, or practical help from others is generally a very adaptive coping strategy. Research shows it can buffer stress responses, lower neurological reactions, lower cortisol release during social stressors.
But is all social support equal?
Excellent point. The quality matters hugely. Conflict within your social network can actually be detrimental. There was a study with newlyweds when hostile couples discussed marital problems. They showed negative changes in immune function and blood pressure. So support needs to be genuinely supportive, not conflict-ridden. It's a reminder that relationships can cut both ways.
Okay, that's crucial. Now, what about avoiding dealing with emotions versus expressing them? Avoidant coping versus expressive coping.
This is another really critical distinction. Avoidant coping, trying to deny negative feelings, push them away, pretend everything's fine when it's not, seems to have pretty significant negative health consequences. It's linked to experiencing more pain, slower recovery from illness or surgery, lower remission rates in depression, even engaging in more risky behaviors among HIV-positive individuals.
So bottling it up is bad.
The evidence leans that way. One really striking study looked at gay men over 5 years. Those who actively concealed their homosexual identity, a form of chronic inhibition, were about 3 times more likely to develop cancer or certain infectious diseases compared to those who were open about their identity, even controlling for HIV status.
3 times more likely, just from concealment.
It suggests that chronic inhibition, whether of identity or emotions, might take a direct physiological toll.
So what's the alternative? Talking, writing.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how articulating our internal world can physically change our health. In contrast to avoidance, talking or writing about negative emotions or significant life events seems to have positive health effects. James Pennebaker did pioneering work here. He had students write about deeply personal traumas, or, as a control, trivial topics. Those who wrote about traumas showed improved immune system functioning afterwards and made fewer visits to the student health center in the following months.
Just from writing about it. Why?
Pennebaker believes writing helps people organize their thoughts and feelings, find meaning or understanding in difficult experiences. This process might reduce negative emotions and lessen the physiological wear and tear associated with holding it all in.
That's pretty amazing. But is there a downside to focusing on negative feelings, like just going over and over it?
Yes, that's the trap of rumination. Rumination isn't constructive processing. It's more like getting stuck in a loop, isolating yourself, worrying constantly, maybe talking repeatedly about how bad things are, but without moving towards solutions or understanding. Studies show rumination actually predicts longer periods of depression after a loss, and surprisingly, it leads to less effective problem solving. Students who just ruminated after an earthquake were more depressed and anxious later, and less likely to have taken active steps to deal with the aftermath.
So process, yes, but don't get stuck spinning your wheels. Find that balance between processing and acting.
Precisely.
Okay, knowing all this, what are some practical techniques people can use to actively manage stress?
There are well-established behavioral and cognitive techniques. On the behavioral side, there's biofeedback.
How does that work?
You get real-time feedback, usually electronic,
Yeah.
about a physiological state you're normally unaware of, like muscle tension in your forehead or your heart rate. By seeing the feedback, you can learn to consciously control that state. For example, learning to relax those forehead muscles can really help with tension headaches. People can learn to lower heart rate, blood pressure to some extent.
Interesting. What else?
Relaxation training is huge. Techniques like progressive muscle relaxation, tensing and releasing muscle groups, or learning to slow down thoughts, focus on breathing, often combined with biofeedback. And of course, exercise. Regular aerobic exercise is fantastic. It lowers heart rate and blood pressure responses to stress and generally reduces illness risk. One study even found combining stress management training with exercise helped chronic chest pain patients reduce their angina frequency.
Okay, those are behavioral. What about changing our thoughts? Cognitive techniques.
This is where cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, comes in. It's a very effective approach. CBT helps you first identify the situations that trigger stress for you, and then monitor your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in response. Then you work on identifying the underlying expectations or beliefs that might be fueling the stress, like perfectionism, or believing you must please everyone.
The internal self-talk.
Exactly. And once you identify those unhelpful thoughts and beliefs, you work systematically to challenge and modify them and practice different behaviors. It's about breaking negative cycles.
Can this work for something ingrained like type A behavior?
Yes, actually. Remember we said type A, especially hostility, is linked to heart disease. Well, programs using a combination of cognitive and behavioral techniques have successfully helped heart attack patients reduce those behaviors. They practice things like deliberately standing in long lines to reduce time urgency, learning assertive but non-aggressive ways to express frustration, reevaluating beliefs about achievement, even making their work environments less frantic.
And did it make a difference to their health?
A big difference. In one major study, the group that got this type A modification training had their heart attack recurrence rate cut almost in half compared to a control group receiving standard cardiac counseling.
Wow. That really drives home the mind-body connection.
It really does. It reinforces this idea that mind and body are constantly influencing each other. We're moving away from simple cause and effect models to understanding this complex interplay of biological, psychological, and social factors in health and illness.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's tackle one final, really thought-provoking debate that kind of pulls together a lot of these threads. Is unrealistic optimism good for your health? It sounds like it shouldn't be, right? Being unrealistic.
It does seem counterintuitive, and there are definitely arguments on both sides.
So who argues it's bad?
Neil D. Weinstein is a key researcher on this side. He points out that most people consistently rate their own risk for negative things, drinking problems, STDs, heart attacks, as below average. Statistically, that's impossible for everyone.
The "it won't happen to me" syndrome.
Exactly. Weinstein calls this unrealistic optimism, not just ignorance. He argues people do it because they want to feel healthy and avoid making difficult changes. The danger, he says, is that it leads them not to take necessary precautions. Like college students who smoke know the risks, but think, oh, I can quit any time, or it'll be okay for me. He argues this kind of optimism is particularly bad when it comes to preventing harm in the first place.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's a counterargument? That unrealistic optimism can be good.
Yes, and Shelley E. Taylor is a major proponent of this view. Her research suggests that rather than undermining healthy habits, optimism, even unrealistic optimism, might actually lead to better ones.
How could that be?
Well, one study found optimists actually pay more attention to health risk information, presumably so they can take preventive steps. Other studies show optimistic elderly men were more likely to exercise, not smoke, and eat well. And crucially, when people are already facing major health threats like AIDS, advanced cancer, heart transplants maintaining positive illusions, or an unrealistically optimistic outlook has been linked to better adjustment, better response to treatment, and even significantly increased survival time.
So when you're already sick, optimism helps you fight.
That seems to be the pattern. The proposed mechanisms are interesting. Optimists tend to use more active, effective coping strategies. They're often more successful interpersonally, which means they attract more social support. And physiologically, they might just have a bodily state that's more conducive to health. Remember the law student study. The optimists had better immune profiles during exams and 10 years later had better health and even better finances. They seem less vulnerable during really stressful times.
So how do we reconcile these two views?
Taylor makes a useful distinction between constructive optimists, Those who maintain hope take active steps, and naive optimists who just passively assume everything will turn out fine. It seems the kind of optimism matters. But overall, Taylor argues that for many people facing serious challenges, those positive illusions can keep them happier, healthier, and more motivated to keep going. The key might be whether optimism fuels action or breeds complacency.
What an incredible journey we've taken today. Seriously. From understanding stress, Jen, its terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, to its deep effects on mind and body. Anxiety, cognitive fog, heart disease, weakened immunity, but then pivoting to the amazing human capacity to cope, to find meaning, even to thrive under pressure. It really comes back to perception, control, connection, mindset. These seem to be the levers.
Indeed. And if there's one core takeaway, maybe it's that knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and applied. Stress is universal, yes, but our responses, our coping mechanisms, these are incredibly powerful tools we have to shape our experience and our health. Our internal world isn't just passively reacting, it's an active participant in our resilience.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Considering how much our perception and our sense of control seem to influence stress, where in your own life might shifting your perspective or maybe actively looking for new meaning unlock a surprising resilience you didn't even know you had. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you next time.